Hi there guys, and welcome to another episode of the Cover Zero Show with me, your host Simon Conboy. Just continuing to plough on through with the franchise and draft reviews for the last decade, covering the years 2007 up until the present day. What I'm doing for this series, I'm breaking down a team's last 10-year record, how many wins and losses they've had, stating any playoff appearances, coaching changes that have happened over that time frame, and then going through the last 10 years worth of draft picks and grading those. I'll explain that grading system once I get to that particular point of the episode. This episode will be covering the New Orleans Saints. So it's certainly been an interesting one. Coaching wise, it's been a simple one. They've had Sean Payton the entire time there. Him and Drew Brees, of course, attached at the hip. Done a pretty good job for the most part. Although, getting into the record, I mean, they've got what looks like a very good record with 91 wins, only 69 losses, so pretty good there, and the one Super Bowl title. 4 playoff appearances in that time, 2 division wins. I gotta say, I was expecting this to be a little higher in terms of playoff appearances. I think it's just, you've got Drew Brees there, who's a future Hall of Fame quarterback and has been so good. I was actually really surprised. It feels like it's been wasted a little bit. Of course, there's been all those defensive struggles across the years, and there's a strong conclusion here that I think a lot of people may potentially see coming. Just a bit of a spoiler, in particular relating to later in the episode. But yeah, I mean that's disappointing. Only 4 playoff appearances with a quarterback of that caliber. Not a huge, pretty good records, but 4, 7, and 9s in the last 5 years. That's really mediocre. Had that spell when they made the plus 3 years in a row. Other than that, they've struggled to recapture that kind of form. So let's get to the draft, see if that's been one of the reasons for that being the case. So what I'm doing here is I'm taking the first 3 rounds. That's where a team is expecting to get contributors, starters, and I'm grading them all individually. If they're a solid pick, you'll be happy for them to make that pick again. They will get score of +1. If the pick was fine, mediocre, unimpressive, that will not affect the score. If the player was a bust, that will be a -1 to the team's score. Picks made rounds 4 through 7. Any players that have made any kind of impact, I'll highlight them. They will add +1 as a value pick. Simple fact is, most players drafted in those rounds have no impact in this league. I don't want to skew results with lots and lots of busts. So, going to the first of the drafts covered here, the 2007 draft. Robert Meacham was the first round pick at 27th overall, the wide receiver. He was a bust, did not do nearly enough with his career. In the 3rd round, Usama Young, a defensive back, had a reasonable stint with the Saints, no grade there. It was acceptable. Andy Ullman, a guard in the 3rd. Yeah, he did nothing. He was a bust. And in the 4th, Jamon Bushrod, the offensive lineman, played a bit of tackle, played a bit of guard in the league, still around to this day. That's a great value pick, solid player. Good job there. The 2008 draft, with the 1st round selection, they picked up Cedric Ellis, defensive tackle, with the 7th overall pick. I mean, he was an absolute bust. I think he was only in the league like 3 or 4 years before he retired. Wasn't enormously effective when he was there. Wasn't by any means bad. Well, but for a player picked that high, to only be in the league that long, that's very disappointing. Underachieved, definite bust there. In the 2nd, Tracy Porter, good selection there. He's been a perfectly reasonable player. Good job for a 2nd round pick, solid. And in the 5th, Carl Nix, the guard. What a value pick. Of course, got unlucky picking up the illness, or was it MRSA, when he joined the Bucks on a massive contract. That was a shame. I was really excited about that signing. Ended his career. But time with the Saints, was an all-pro caliber offensive lineman. Great value in the 5th. Great selection there. Moving on to 2009. Only the one pick in the first 3 rounds there. I'm imagining that's down to Bountygate there. Malcolm Jenkins, the 1st round selection. 14th overall, defensive back. This was a tough. I mean, I've got to give it a solid, because at the minute he's a really, really good safety over in Philly. Was a bust in New Orleans, to be honest. They tried him at corner, it didn't quite work, moved him to safety and then replaced him. Turns out he's actually better than the safeties they've got. They made a mistake there. So I'm going to give it a solid, but that credit has to go to Philly there. They brought him in and he lived up to his draft stock there. Unfortunately, kind of washed out in New Orleans. Moving on to the 2010 draft, we've got Patrick Robinson, the defensive back with a 32nd overall pick. He was a bust, did absolutely nothing. In the second, Charles Brown, the offensive tackle, were injury issues there. They really affected him, never managed to get on the field. He was also a bust. In the third, Jimmy Graham, home run there, nailed it. He ended up being, a super dynamic weapon for them now with Seattle. Took some time to adjust there, but one of the top receiving tight ends in the league. And in the fourth, Al Woods, defensive tackle. He's gone to have a pretty good career. Good value in the fourth, even if he didn't do too much with New Orleans. The 2011 draft, we've got Cam Jordan, the defensive lineman, selected 24th overall. Slam dunk, home run pick there. He's one of the better defensive linemen in the league. I wanted the Bucks to select him that year. It was the year we selected Claiborne. I wanted Cam Jordan. I don't always get him right, but this one I did, and I was a big fan of his in college. Great player. Also in the first, Mark Ingram with a 28th selection, the running back. I've gone for mediocre here. I think for a first round running back, you want him to have more impact than Ingram has. He's certainly fine. As I've said before, I'm going to end up doing like my Alex Smith ratio for each position, and spoiler alert, Ingram is like that mark for running backs where he's fine. That's all he is. For a first rounder, not quite enough to be solid, but certainly not a bust, so no effect on the grade there. In the third, Martez Wilson, a linebacker, he did nothing. He was a bust. And also Johnny Patrick, another defensive back. He was a bust. Moving on to 2012, we've got no first or seconds there. We've got Akeem Hicks, the defensive end. Reasonable player. I'll give that solid. Probably wouldn't be if it was a first or second, but for a third, I think he's had a pretty good career. Moving on to 2013, in the first round, Kenny Vaccaro, the safety, with the 15th overall selection. I don't rate Vaccaro. Think he can play that linebacker safety hybrid spot reasonably. I think he's an absolute liability in coverage. I've got to say bust based on draft selection. If he was right at the back end of round 1, maybe it would be mediocre. Round 2, maybe even a solid. But considering where he was selected, I'd say he's been a bust, especially considering they ended up letting Malcolm Jenkins go, who's a superior player at that spot. In the third, Teron Armstead, the offensive tackle. That's a home run pick. He's one of the better left tackles in football right now. Supremely athletic, fantastic player. And then in the third, we've got John Jenkins, the defensive lineman. Gone for mediocre there. He's been reasonable in his career. And then in the fifth, Kenny Stills, now with the Dolphins. By no means a great receiver, but just a deep threat, but fantastic value in the fifth. Certainly an NFL caliber wide receiver. Moving on to 2014, now with the last 3 drafts and being a little bit more lenient. Of course, there's a lot of players who haven't necessarily seen the field enough, or the jury is still out as to whether they're a bust or not. So a little bit more lenient here, a bit more fence sitting, as much as I hate sitting on the fence. First round, Brandon Cooks, being traded to the Patriots now, 20th overall, pretty solid, good receiver. Could have went with mediocre there, but I've edged towards solid. I think he's been productive in his time there. Stanley Jean-Baptiste, the defensive back, in the second. He's done nothing. He's a bust at this point. Moving on to 2015, Andrews Pete, the tackle, at 13. I was struggling here. I was tempted to go bust because I think he's been very underwhelming considering his draft spot. It's not ideal, but I'm willing to see what happens. They've tried playing him at guard as well. We'll see how his career progresses. I'm going to sit on the fence on this one, but I am edging towards bust. I was very tempted to go with bust, to be honest. And Stephon Anthony, also in the first at 31. He's okay. Performed reasonably for them. Not willing to necessarily go solid at this point. Again, sit on the fence, see how things go. In the second, Haualohi Kikaha, I believe that's right, Kihaka. Missed all of last season with an injury. Had a reasonable rookie season. Jury's still out there, of course. We'll have to see how he comes back from the injury. And the third, Garrett Grayson, the quarterback. He's not even on the roster anymore, so for that reason he has to go down as a bust. And in the third, PJ Williams, a defensive back. Not seen enough of him to make a decision. last year's draft, we've got Sheldon Rankins, who was selected 12th overall defensive lineman. I think, of course, missed a chunk of the season. I think he played great when he did come in. I'm content giving that a solid at this point. Should continue to develop and get better. Michael Thomas in the second, they nailed that one. He was fantastic last season, playing that Marcus Colston sort of role for them, giving Breeze a bigger bodied receiver. I expect to see him doing a lot of the same stuff that Colston did in that offense. Definitely a solid there. Also, Von Bell was selected in the second. Not willing to make a decision on that one at this point in time. We'll see how things continue to go. So, the totals for the New Orleans Saints, we have 9 solid to home run picks and only 4 values, so not a great job there. The conclusion I hinted at earlier is basically when you go through this list, it's really impressive to see just how, on the offensive side, when they've selected players, outside of maybe Robert Meacham, they've generally worked, they found good value of offensive linemen in particular, and some of the wide receivers. Of course, you've got some guys on the roster at the moment that weren't necessarily high picks that are staples in that offense. You've got Willie Snead, was undrafted. They do a great job there. But defensively, there's just so many players that have just not done anything or been underwhelming or poor players. I mean, you look at Cedric Ellis. Jenkins has ended up a fine player, but he's that all happened outside the team. I don't rate Vaccaro at all, considering where he was drafted. Sheldon Rankins is really the only real positive there. So, yeah, great job finding offensive players and value on offense. They've done as bad a job as anyone drafting defensively. So, I think that sounds like the Saints through and through. Just every decision to make on offense seems to work. Defensively, it all seems to be a disaster zone. 10 busts, along with the 13 positive players. So that gives them a total of +3. Just not enough players coming out of these drafts. So many of them not achieving anything of note. So it's really disappointing. That would be a +2 if you were to exclude the Jenkins draft. One of the poorer teams in the first round, they got 4 solid, but again, one of them, Jenkins, sort of an asterisk next. 3 busts, and some of the recent ones I'm still undecided on. As I say, Andrews Pete, I'm really edging towards bust at this point in his career. So they've not done a good job there. Again, offensively, generally they're nailing it. So it's just, there you go. That's the Saints under Sean Payton through and through, isn't it? So, what do you guys think of this series so far? I've really enjoyed, the research for this. As I say, the Friday episode I think is essential viewing to get the most out of this series. Really get the context of these statistics, and you'll be able to compare and really see which teams stand out, which teams are poor, and then how they've done over the last decade. I think it's going to be a really good episode. If you disagree with any of my opinions, I can expect maybe the Vaccaro one will be one that some people disagree with. Well, that's one I'm going to stand by. You're not going to convince me that that was a good pick at this stage in time. That's down to him on the field. So, yeah, let me know whether it's in the comments on Facebook, the Cover Zero page, below on YouTube, or you contact me via Twitter. I'll do my absolute best to get back to absolutely everyone. Thank you very much for viewing. If you enjoyed it, as I say, check out the Friday show. Please check out more of the videos. I'm sure if you like this, you'll enjoy them too. And as always, like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. That'd be greatly appreciated. Check out the Patreon. It's always grand. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for your time. And as always, go Bucks.